Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Nicole Byars is the author of Living Yoga Beyond the Mat, 10 life-changing ways to move from messy personal growth to living in heart-centered alignment. Nicole has hit a few bumps in the road. For years, she led the life of a high-achieving, people-pleasing person. She struggled with her career path and an eating disorder, and she found herself in a marriage that wasn't working. But she also found a profound strength within herself to change her life. She now uses mindfulness, kindness, and grace to navigate her world. Please welcome Nicole Byars to Bump in the Road. Nicole, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Thank you for having me. My name is Nicole. And as far as my story goes, just to give some context, I am from Minnesota. You can probably hear it in my accent. Grew up here. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. Grew up going to private Catholic schools my whole life until I went to college. My parents, they're still together. Grew up in a very high achieving family, professional driven family. My father is a physician and my mom was a nurse. And so just to kind of paint a scene, growing up, great parents, there was just a drive for success and high achieving family. And so, and going to, private Catholic schools, there was really a push for academics and going to college and really kind of following that path. So, high school, got great grades, tended to kind of ride the line of rebel, getting great grades, athlete, that whole thing. But dabbled probably with the wrong crowd at times, got into drinking, but still really maintained that high achieving status, if you will, as an academic and an athlete. Then college came. I went to Arizona State. Total, 180, if you will. Great school, got a finance degree, and really was trying to follow that track of you go to high school, you get great grades, you go to college, and then you work in corporate America. That's what you do. For me, that didn't ever feel right, but I kept pushing that because that's what I felt would make my parents happy and everybody else happy around me. So did that, graduated with a finance degree. And then when I was 25 is when things really started to come to a head. And at that point, again, I was working in corporate America, but everything inside of me just felt like it wasn't right. It didn't feel right. But the people-pleasing side of me was like, nope, this is what we do. We keep pushing forward. And what ended up happening in my mid-20s is I got to a place where I don't think I could take it. I couldn't take it anymore. And I was so unhappy. And so the way that I dealt with my unhappiness, with my loneliness, with all of these different feelings that I had coming up was to numb. And the way that I numbed was through my eating disorder. And so when I was 25, I was admitted into an eating disorder program, and that I was anorexic. And, being anorexic and restricting my food, it gave me this kind of sense of control in my life that I didn't feel like I had for so many years. Just again, trying to please, my family and do what I thought was the right thing and fit into this box. And so things really came to a head for me. Went to treatment for my eating disorder. And that during that time was when I was introduced to yoga. So yoga became a really important piece in my recovery. It helped me to slow down. It helped me to connect with myself again. So get into yoga and get out of treatment and then decide I should get on a dating website. That's a great idea. Hence a little bit of the sarcasm. And get on a dating website, meet a man who looked amazing on paper, great job, good looking, seemed to have a really good family, drove a nice car, all external things. And we ended up dating for a couple of months and got married within 6 months of knowing each other. So ended up getting married at the age of 26. And to be honest with you, after I got out of my eating disorder treatment, I was in a very vulnerable state. I still had a lot of work to do. But I still felt that loneliness and I still felt lost. And I resorted to distraction and looking for a man to maybe fulfill this kind of emptiness inside of me. And so rushed into a relationship, got married at the age of 26. And from there had 2 kids, 2 boys that are now 12 and 13. And out of that marriage, I had 2 beautiful boys. And fast forward 8 years, I ended up leaving him and went through a really devastating divorce that I learned so much from. And during that time, that 8 years was when I also opened up a yoga studio. And to this day, still own a yoga studio, and I'm an entrepreneur. And I'm a yoga teacher, and I also host retreats and do all this other stuff. But that was a big part of what really started to cause friction in my marriage and ultimately ended in divorce. So let's bring it back from high school. I just kind of wanted to paint the picture for people kind of who I was and what I was striving for and some of those bumps, right, around the way, and getting married in a very vulnerable state. Fast forward 8 years, got divorced. And now, I have been divorced for 7 years. I'm remarried to an amazing man and am in a really solid place. But it took a lot of stuff, a lot of bumps to get here.
What did it take to get into a solid place?
A lot of therapy, to be honest, but also an awareness. I really had to take a look at my behaviors and why did I always get in dysfunctional relationships? And, I had a pattern in high school, in college, and then who I married. I really was always in toxic relationships where I allowed men to treat me very poorly. And so I have had to take a really solid look at myself and what part do I play in that? Because I think it's important. It's easy to take on the victim role and to blame. But I do believe that it's very important to take a look at yourself and what part did you play in that? And what I realized with myself is I never really took care of me. I never, in my thoughts and in my people-pleasing nature, I was always putting myself last and worried about everybody else around me and making everybody else happy. And so I never kept commitments to myself. I was just so focused on external things around me that I never treated myself with the love and the respect that I deserved. And so because of that, I allowed the men in my life to treat me in a very similar manner. And it took self-reflection and awareness to really take a look at myself and why does this keep happening? What is this pattern? I think a lot of us have patterns in our life and we can spin. But the pattern is not going to be broken until we take a step back and really look at ourselves and what do I need to do in my life to create change? And for me, it was really finding like this sense of love towards self, that I deserved love and respect. And I don't need that from another person. I can give that to myself.
Did yoga play a role in revamping these patterns?
Absolutely. Learning how to slow down was very difficult for me as a high achiever. I always was moving so fast because a lot of times when we are moving really fast, we don't feel. It's a numbing mechanism. And so I was always moving really fast. I was always trying to achieve. Because that's where I found my self-worth. That's where I found worth, was in my successes and my achievements. That will never bring you happiness. It really starts from within. And I always like to give people this, if you think about, we were all babies at one point. We were all, when you think about a newborn baby, and you think about the innocence and the pureness of a baby, they aren't clouded or jaded by life experiences or belief systems or self-doubt or any of those things. They're just pure love. And we all came into the world like that. And I believe that there is that part of us, it's still there. And we can access it at any time. And yoga has helped me in so many ways. And not necessarily, I think people think yoga is only a physical practice. Honestly, a lot of my yoga is a meditation practice. It's sitting, it's being quiet with a cup of coffee and just noticing my surroundings. It's just slowing down and connecting with that essence that exists, that peace, that pureness, that love that exists in every single one of us.
Well, you hit on so many important points. I totally agree with you that many of us turn to just activity to numb ourselves, because if we're busy and we're externally oriented, we never have to look within. But I'm really curious, how did anorexia create numbness? I'm not sure I follow that connection.
It's a distraction. So when you're constantly obsessing about how many calories you're eating, what food you're going to eat, it is a distraction from just like alcohol, just like drugs, excessive shopping. It's just a distraction from feeling. It's a numbing mechanism. And so, it also gave me a sense of control. Like when I felt like my life was out of control and I felt like I felt so lost, restricting my food, allowing myself, 500 calories a day was what it was. And just obsessing over when I was going to work out and, what foods am I going to eat? It's a distraction from the hard things that I'm feeling inside. And it gave me a sense of control, a very unhealthy sense of control.
I don't know if there's a healthy sense of control. Control is something that's really interesting. I mean, I think we all wrestle with it one way or the other. What's an appropriate amount of control? Do we really control control anything? Is control the ultimate illusion? I mean, as I've gotten older, I've come to think that it's the latter. It's a total illusion because all we control is ourselves ultimately.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I agree with you. I don't know if there is a healthy form of control. And I agree with you. As I'm getting older, I just turned 43. Releasing control, surrendering. I talk about that a lot in my yoga classes, just surrendering control. And it is not easy.
No, it's not. It is not easy. And I'm not sure that some control isn't needed in life. And it's a very gray area. And I don't know just where on the spectrum is healthy or not.
Mm-hmm. I don't either. I don't know. I don't have, because it's something I still struggle with, even in my business. I don't know if you can relate to that, just kind of.
Big time.
Yeah. I've gotten much better, but in the beginning of owning a studio, it's like I had to do everything. And when I hired a coach, she just was, you need to start to delegate. And it gave me a lot of anxiety to delegate to somebody else, and I was just like, wow, this is something to just notice, this is tough. This is hard for me. But over the years, I've gotten better at it, but still it's something that I will struggle with, especially in my business.
I know when I started off on social media, I would, be there following people and responding and everything else. And I'd look at the numbers every day. Yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Yeah. And now I'm at a point of, it doesn't matter to me. I think that my voice reaches the right people, I hope, at some point or another. And that's all I can do. And all I can do is put out things with kindness and care. And then it goes where it goes.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like giving up maybe, but I don't think it is. I think it's a healthier, better perspective on this achieving gene that is in so many of us.
Yeah. What I was going to say, I've heard before, instead of saying, giving up, it's you're giving over.
I like
just
that.
Kind of, yeah. You're just kind of giving it up or giving it over to, whatever it is that you believe in, a power greater than yourself or your higher self, or just trusting. Again, not easy to do, but you're giving over.
Yeah, and it brings up trust. I've been pondering trust lately for a variety of reasons. And I think that ability to trust is in something greater is really important. Mary Neal, when she was on the podcast, said that she was an orthopedic surgeon who had a near-death experience, okay? So she's very linear, very scientific, and she spent a year trying to disprove her experience to herself. And she had said that she went from hope to trust. And I love that because it's such an astonishing paradigm shift in terms of how you see the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if you could just trust, imagine how differently we would all move through things.
It's interesting that you bring up trust because when I was going through my eating disorder treatment, and I still have all the work that we did and, things like that. And one thing that I had written on a Post-it note that I still have is an affirmation that says, I am trusting. And it's more about trusting, trusting myself and my needs and my body, and just trusting within, right? And so that's been a big important concept for me too. Obviously, like what you're talking about, trusting that things will, it's this idea of kind of surrendering control and trusting. And I take it one step further too, to bringing it back internally to self. And it's important that we trust ourselves and that we trust our bodies, because 80% of our wisdom comes from our bodies and only 20% comes from our brain. And many of us live up in our head and we're always thinking, and we make pros and cons lists to make decisions and things like that. But really, our bodies are always talking to us. And 80% of that wisdom and learning to trust in our bodies, it's harder for people to connect with that because the way that our bodies speak to us is through sensations in our body. So if something is feeling like, if you're making a decision and if you just pause and you take a moment to feel in your body, you know when the answer is a no. It's a anxiety. It's a tightness in the chest. It's a tightness in the throat. I mean, everybody feels it differently, but when it's a yes, it's a softness. It's an ease. And I think what I've learned over the years, especially with yoga too, is just learning to just pause, to feel, to know what your yes is, to know what your no is in your body, and then trust that.
I think that is so wise. I had an experience recently where I felt that the energy dynamics were kind of teetering on abusive. Not horrible, but it had that tone to it, okay? And I made a decision to just get out, move away from the situation. And when I did, this rush of positivity, of energy, of joy hit me so hard. It was like, oh my gosh, did I ever make the right decision for me?
Yeah.
There was an energetic component of it. And I think that that's always there. What we have to do is develop the ability to be still, to be quiet, so that we can sense it and pick up on it earlier and more often.
Yeah. And when we don't listen, like, for example, thinking about in my marriage, my ex-husband was verbally and emotionally abusive. And towards the end of the marriage, and I kept trying to stay and make it better. And I had all this hope because I had kids and, wanted to stay for them. And, but every Sunday for like a 2-month period, my body would shut down and I would be sick and I would be nauseous. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed every Sunday. And in hindsight, now when I look back on that, that was my body protecting me from the abuse. And at some point, if we're not going to listen to our bodies or do what's best for us, or even think about when you get a sickness, if you're rushing, going, your body is going to shut it down for you until you do what you need to do to rest or to get out of that toxic relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, there are numerous perspectives on yoga. One certainly is the physical part. One is the meditative part. There's also a great deal of spiritual history behind yoga too. To what extent did that influence you and how?
Can you repeat? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. To what extent?
The spiritual history behind yoga is really extensive. I mean, it's really a spiritual way of life, or it can be if you want to choose that. Was that part of your equation too?
Yeah, I think as I evolve more, the spiritual piece of yoga, the history of yoga, the philosophy of yoga, I mean, that's what my book is all about, is how do we live yoga off the mat? As I evolve, that becomes the most important piece for me. Prior to getting into yoga, it was more about the physical piece. It was more about the physical practice. But again, as I've kind of gone down this road over the last 10 years of teaching and being in this industry, I've really opened myself up to less of the physical practice and more of the learning how to live in the present moment, more about this like present moment living. And if you think about the practice of yoga that began thousands of years ago, it was never a physical practice. It was a seated meditation, intentional practice. And then in the 70s was when we really westernized yoga to be a physical practice. So there's a lot of history around yoga, but it really started out as just a present moment meditative experience.
I think the present moment is magic. And like everybody else, I struggle to be there as much as I can. Mm-hmm. But it's in that moment that possibility exists. Mm-hmm. And if you're not there, if you're not present, I feel like you're missing your life.
Yeah.
You know, I can look back and say, wow, I wish I'd known this 20 years ago.
Yeah. I know. I wish I did too, and I just hope for my kids, I'm always trying to kind of give them little tools and things like that. But what I'm learning is, they really have no interest in what I do, but they're watching you, right? I'll say to them, boys, I'm going to go and meditate, or I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go for a walk. I want them to see me leading by example. And one day, if they have more questions or if they're struggling with something, when they get older or in their teens, they can come to me and ask for help, And so I think just like leading by example is important too.
I think so too. If you could rewrite your story, would you?
No. I wouldn't. I think like everybody in life, we all go through so many ups and downs. The reason why I hesitated to answer, being divorced is hard. And it always, I think I've made a lot of progress over the years, but, I think just around the holidays and things like that, like it can be especially more challenging and difficult, especially if you don't have your kids on a certain holiday. And holidays are kind of a time where it kind of smacks you in the face that you are divorced. And, I wish that my relationship, and my marriage was different? Sure. But I look at what I got from that marriage, and I honestly had to go through what I went through to get here. Plus, I would never have had these beautiful boys. And it was a very important piece of my journey. And then I also think about my husband now and how grateful I am to have him. My kids said to me once, and it's very true. And I've asked them before, I said, is it hard with mom and dad being divorced? And they'll say, sometimes going back and forth can be hard. But my older son said, Mom, it's actually pretty cool because we have that many more people who now love us in our life. If you look at, they have their dad, they have now their stepdad, and then my husband's grandparent, like now they have 3 sets of grandparents, so that is a really cool perspective. So I think it's important that I think our kids teach us a lot, but just to be grateful, even the hard stuff, I feel like it's all been a part of my path and it has led me here. So I would not change it, not even my divorce. Mm-mm.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.